afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Portland. This is Friday, June 24th. I'm Melody Rose, the president of City Club, and I'm very pleased to have you with us today. Both the members and guests who join us here at the Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio, or watching on Portland Community Media City Net 30. Today, we're delighted to welcome two speakers who will talk to us about how economics can help restore and maintain the environment. But before our program begins, we have a few special announcements. To begin, out of respect to our guests and our speakers, please silence your cell phones. Next, I'd like to give a warm City Club welcome to new City Club members. We have three with us today. Jessica Corey of TVW, if you would please stand and be recognized. Gloria Black and Roberta Palmer, if you would all please stand and let us recognize you. City Club's corporate and media partners are essential to the vitality and sustainability of all of our club's activities. I'd like to thank our generous media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine, and to offer our deep appreciation to the Friday Forum corporate sponsors. Please join me in giving a warm thank you to communications firm Morel Inc., utility company Northwest Natural, and the law firms of Perkins Coie and Schwabe Williamson Wyatt. We are very grateful for your support and the commitment that you bring to the City Club mission. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you all that if your company or firm would like to support the club's mission through sponsorship, please see our friendly Friday Forum and City Club staff at the back of the room or call the City Club office for more information. Today, in addition to our usual member questions, we'll be taking index card questions during the question and answer period. During the forum, we invite you to write your questions that you have for either of the speakers on the index cards that should be on your tables. You do not need to be a City Club member to submit a question. During the board host question, City Club staff will collect these index cards and bring them up here to me, and I'll read one or more of them from the podium so that we can include your questions and thoughts as well. We're sure you'll come up with some very good questions for our speakers today. And now to our program. Stream temperatures impact fish and wildlife habitat and are easily affected by human activity. Environmental laws compel utility companies whose clean but warm wastewater often increases stream temperatures to spend significant amounts of money addressing their ecological impact. Government regulation can protect the environment from harm, but it doesn't always provide the most effective or economically efficient ways to do so. Two local organizations, the Willamette Partnership and the Freshwater Trust, are developing new ways to protect nature by creating markets where businesses can trade the expense of meeting government regulations for investments in the restoration of watersheds and water quality. Today, we will hear from the heads of these two organizations about their important work. Today's first speaker is Joe Whitworth, who has served as president of the Freshwater Trust for over a decade. The Freshwater Trust works to restore Oregon's river basins to their historic conditions. Joe co-chairs the Water Subcommittee for the Oregon Global Warming Commission, serves on the Oregon Department of Agriculture Water Quality Review Committee, and is a founder of the Council for Responsible Sport. Joe has published in both popular and technical journals and holds a bachelor's degree from Dartmouth College and a law degree from Lewis and Clark. Our second speaker today is Bobby Cochran, Executive Director at the Willamette Partnership. The Willamette Partnership is a coalition of leaders from both industry and non-governmental organizations who are working together to shift the way people value, manage, and regulate the human impact on our environment. Bobby has worked on market-based policies for environmental organizations and a water utility, and has also helped develop international policies. He received his master's in public policy from the University of Southern California and his PhD, I'm proud to say, in urban studies and conflict resolution from Portland State University. And without further ado, please help me to welcome our first speaker, Joe Whitworth.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me here today to speak with the City Club, and I have the distinct honor to be speaking with Bobby Cochran, who actually we've been having talks like this all around the region over the last, me only over the last couple of years, but Bobby over the last better part of a decade. And so, again, my name is Joe Whitworth. I'm the president of the Freshwater Trust, and what we do is fix rivers. You may know us better under our original name, Oregon Trout, where we were the group that listed the first Pacific salmon, or perhaps under the second group that we ultimately merged with, the Oregon Water Trust, which leases or purchases excess irrigation water from landowners and putting it in stream for the benefit of the stream. So I will be covering the why watershed restoration needs to be a growth industry, and Bobby will be covering the far more difficult how. So the issues that face our freshwater ecosystems today are roughly the size of the Governor Hotel, and our collective ability to get at those issues, everybody in conservation, is about the diameter of a golf ball. This needs to change if we ever really intend to recover a salmon or achieve freshwater health on a scale that matters. Now, the stakes are high, and while environmental victories are easy to come by every day, the environment itself is losing its war. Our ability to correct course is actually limited by our own successful history as an environmental movement, but we really need to do it. Before getting into that, though, we need to understand kind of the current status of things before we can understand fully the stakes that we're playing with. As you all know, water is a very precious, precious commodity. We have, if you put the entire world's water in a gallon jug, only 1 tablespoon would be fresh water. 2/3 of that would be frozen. So we're talking about 1/3 of 1 tablespoon to take care of all the needs of all life on Earth, human and biological. The biosphere is the ultimate closed-loop system. We've never had any more or any less water than we did the day this planet was formed, give or take a few asteroids that brought in some freeze on them. But what is changing, and increasingly so, is the quality and character of when that water shows up and where it shows up and what condition it is in. And we have had a very, very direct say in how that's been done over the years. In Oregon, we have 115,000 stream miles. About 1/3 of those, 30,000 stream miles, fail to fully support aquatic life. Now, there are an additional 50,000 stream miles that are kind of on the bubble in terms of how healthy they are, and they need to be addressed. We're not moving at a terribly swift pace in getting at those. We're probably completing, and I mean everybody in this business, maybe 600 projects a year. Okay, so 600 projects a year into, if they all average 1 mile of benefit into 80,000 stream miles means, well, it equals never, to be honest. In the United States, we're a little bit better. Oregon is a little bit better off than the United States, which has 3.6 billion stream miles. About 35% of those are impaired and need to be addressed. That's about 1.3, 1.2 billion stream miles. In the Northwest, as it relates to endangered fish, we are 0 for 27 in recovering listed species, despite a ton of effort by a lot of good people. We also have the advent of climate disruption coming at us like a freight train. We have lost half of our April 1 snowpack in the Cascades since 1955. We will lose half again within a generation. So we are in an incredible race. We're behind now, and things are speeding up all around us. In terms of water, water is in everything. There's a water component in every product in this room, in any product you buy at a grocery store. You know, everything from a pair of blue jeans, which has, you know, somewhere on the line of 2,000 gallons of water in it to create the cotton, to get those blue jeans on Saturday when you're doing your home improvements. And I'm not going to advocate for not wearing blue jeans, but it is there. The fact is, everything that we have or touch or want actually does have a water component in it. A pound of beef, for example, takes 1,800 gallons of water to get to your table. Now, that in and of itself is not too scary, but when you consider the developing world, as they get wealthy and wealthier, appetites move up the food chain. So what that means for the United States is we are the third largest exporter of water in the world, primarily through our grains, not simply to go and feed animals, but ultimately to feed humans. For example, China, the difference between what China had in terms of its meat consumption in 1985 to 2009, the difference alone is equivalent to all of the water use in Europe annually. And they're just getting started. So again, this race is one that we have to get ahead of because there are pressures bearing down on this resource that we have perhaps known about, but we are beginning to understand at a new level. And now we're trying to figure out how do we act on this information. So it's important to understand a little bit of background. Most of the modern environmental movement is really framed in a very negative vocabulary. It's focused on the impacts that need to be avoided. Think about dumping pollution into a stream, or extraction that must not occur. Think about logging sales, or species that should not go extinct. In our case, here in the Northwest, salmon is what we're one of the ones that we're most interested in. And so we're at a point in history where we have an extraction-based past, we have a conservation-based future, and right now we're between value sets. And we're trying to figure out how this really does work as an applied matter. And where we're at the Freshwater Trust, and me personally, I believe we have to change the entire dialogue from environmental loss to environmental gain. And that's far easier said than done. And I think if you go back over the history of the environmental movement, 42 years ago today, or not today, two days ago, in 1969, the Cuyahoga River caught on fire. Right? Most of the people hear those words, and you have an image in your mind about what that looked like. And we learn through images. That image changed everything, and it lingers with us today and expresses itself in how we actually go after environmental decision-making or natural resource decision-making. And so we turned with that moment to focus on identifying and stopping bad things from happening. But while big events capture our imagination and our attention, it's really becoming quite clear that it's the little things that are stealing our ecological future. The recent events in the Gulf of Mexico are illustrative. Last June, President Obama characterized the explosion on the Deepwater Horizon rig as the worst environmental disaster America has ever faced. And while that monopolized the media coverage and certainly did render significant difficulty for that regional economy, the fact is that event was the least of that ecosystem's problems. The Mississippi River Basin drains quietly 31 states of the country, and with it go a lot of extra goodies, right? A lot of extra nutrients. And breaking those compounds down requires cool water. It requires quite a bit of oxygen. And because of these nutrients reaching such an overwhelming rate, they completely overtake what the system can actually oxidize. And so as the nutrients go down and they begin to asking all the available oxygen to break them down, they really just suck all the oxygen out of the water. And we end up in a hypoxic situation, which means there's no oxygen. Many of you have heard of it, it's known as the dead zone or a hypoxic zone. In August of last year, the dead zone extended about 7,800 square miles from the mouth of the Mississippi. It was the 5th largest on record, and if it were a state, it would be larger than Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Washington, D.C. combined. This year, with all of the flooding in the upper Midwest, we are predicting that it will be the largest dead zone in human history at the mouth of the Mississippi. So, as I noted, this is, the explosion was not as bad as everything else that's going on there. And one writer characterized the disaster as something along the lines of a terminal cancer patient taking a shot from a handgun in the leg. And I think that is, unfortunately, pretty darn close to the reality. So how did we get into a situation where something as big as the Deepwater Horizon is not terribly consequential? How do we, more importantly, get ahead of this and get at something so big? And for our money, it's going to come down to finding the new tools and, honestly, a new kind of language or currency with which we can begin to make better decisions. Now, 4 decades ago, when the obvious problems for freshwater environments were very easy to find, very easy to point to, and enforcement on these sources actually went really, really well. It worked. When was the last time you heard of a river catching on fire, right? But we did fail to take into account effectively a lot of the little pieces, all of those little bits of runoff that come from our yards, our stormwater systems, from our agricultural fields. Without near stream plants and wetlands to shade and filter all of those things as they go down the system, certainly in the central part of the country, but also everywhere in the United States and around the world, we leave the biggest problems undealt with. And so as the environmental movement started in the early 1970s, the modern environmental movement, there's some great big things going on in agriculture at the same time, right? World War II technology allowed us to clear more fields, put more land under production, and also, perfect fertilizers. We saw a massive explosion in efficiency and productivity. And just so you know, I grew up bucking hay in the summertime, so I'm not a run agriculture down kind of guy, but I am pretty honest about what we have to deal with. And that is not the sole source of where some of our issues are, but it is today and going forward the biggest source, and we have to address it and get out in front of it. We do all eat, but we all have to eat forever. And so that means that agriculture needs to be in balance with human activities that are happening beyond the farm. So bringing the dead zone piece to a close, I don't want to go too far down into it, but the big takeaway is we have kept track of victories and losses within the environmental realm, kind of one lawsuit at a time, historically. And what we now need to do is focus on a common currency that begins to quantify how we keep score. We can't have agriculture simply feeling that the environmental community is trying to ruin their way of life. And the environmental community has to understand that agriculture doesn't wake up in the morning and say, how can I put the hurt on this stream today, right? But again, it's a big trick to do that. The key to that, the first step to that, is understanding our environment, not for what it is, but for what it does. While a tree is a great place to have a picnic, you can hear the leaves rustling up top and so forth, but the fact is it adds to bank stabilization and decreases sediments and uptakes nutrients that would otherwise get in a stream, right? We can now quantify that for the first time. A wetland is great for recreating. I love to get a kayak or canoe out there, but the fact is it does some wonderful things for filtering out sediments, providing for organic decomposition, and ultimately for cooling water temperatures before it returns to a waterway. And we have certainly our work cut out for us so that we can quantify those units of environmental good in a way that we can begin to look at and compare the units of environmental bad that are needing to be offset. And again, this entire next phase of conservation is, I believe, focused on pursuing environmental gain instead of just stopping bad things from happening. So Senator Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin on the very first Earth Day noted that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment, not the other way around, right? We accept that as a truism, but to be honest, we've never kept score correctly. And right now, again, we'll have Dr. Robert Costanza. He was actually at the University of Vermont back in the 1990s. He is today at Portland State University, but he was the first one that really put a number on the natural benefits that our environment provides us. And the number is $33 trillion annually. And for perspective, that is inflation adjusted, equivalent to Louisiana Purchase, the New Deal, the Marshall Plan, the Korean and Vietnam War, the savings and loan crisis bailout, and the moonshot combined. So we're talking about a lot of things that are worth a lot of money, and we have never really tracked them, which is to me pretty astounding. We know that the restoration economy is real. The Pacific Northwest has one of the most robust restoration economies in the world, and Oregon is the leader among them. Everything from Bonneville's $250 million, half of which is for foregone revenues due to spill, so maybe half of that's actual dirt money or where you can do work. OWEB can do $50 or $100 million a year, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. So the coordinator of those projects, the logger, the fence builder, the tree planter, the nurseryman, all are part of a growing restoration economy that is making an impact locally, not just obviously on the environment or the streams, but also within the local economy. For every $1 million of dollars in restoration, that represents 20 jobs around a community. 90 cents of every dollar normally stays in the state, and 80 cents stays right there in the community itself. And there's a multiplier effect as well that goes, people who are on the jobs, they pay for gas, they pay for shovels, they pay for groceries, they pay for childcare, and those folks in turn purchase more goods, in turn purchase, from the local economy. And so these are really big, big impacts. In the John Day, over in Grant County, a couple of river basins east of here, they are struggling with about a 15% unemployment rate, and times were tough there to start. It's tough to put a life together out there. And we did a project on the Middle Fork where we essentially returned a stream to its natural function in its original meander. We spent about $2.7 million creating about 24 jobs, and that made a big difference. That made a great big difference in that community. And that's just one of the things that we're doing. But I'll tell you, we are currently spending we're spending billions of dollars on a trillions of dollar problem. In Oregon's case, we're spending millions of dollars annually for a billions of dollar problem. And so if you look at the number, that was a University of Oregon report, using their numbers, if we took $50,000 to do a streamside project, which is a ballpark good number, and we repaired those 30,000 most hammered stream miles, we can generate $1.5 billion in direct investment and create 30,000 local jobs over a period of time. I would suggest that given that the most recent gymnasium at University of Oregon costs somewhere on the line of $400 or $500 million, we've got that in us. But if you look at this nationally, 35% of those $3.6 billion, if you did that same math at $50,000 a project, you're talking about a $63 trillion number. Achieving that kind of scale will never happen, ever, if all we do is fund these things the way that we have been funding them. We have simply got to engage the type of an economic engine that could create a dead zone as big as 3 states. And that was a set of rational economic decisions made by regular folks on their land every day for a number of years. And we have simply got to integrate these currencies of environmental benefits into how they run their business. We have to put them in a position where they can do things that actually, they have to grow bushels of nature as much as they grow bushels of beans. And we can do that, but the first step is having sort of a lingua franca between all players, right? Whether it's agricultural producers who are responsible for most of the water quality difficulties that we're facing here today, through, I will say, no fault of their own. They were just trying to get by. Through municipal wastewater treatment facilities who also have effluents that come back. Their water is clean, but it's hot. And unfortunately, everybody in this room plays a role in that, right? Also the environmental community. We've got to find a way to harness these things, harness all of these realities and put them to work for us. So Willamette Partnership has operationalized this lingua franca through their scientific methods and ecological accounting protocols. And that is truly, I will submit, the first step for us achieving the environmental gain that we need to have in the United States and the Northwest today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Joe. That was a great setup in terms of a sense of urgency that we got a real problem we need to try and fix. And thank you, City Club, and everyone here for having us. It's pretty exciting, after we put my 1.5 and 4-year-old down, we get to listen to OPB at 7 o'clock on Friday night. So it's nice to be part of that group. Joe had mentioned a little bit about what the Willamette Partnership does, but at our core, we're a nonprofit conservation coalition. We really started in 1998 by executive order when Governor Kitzhaber had his first term. And our mission was to expand the pace, scope, and effectiveness of restoration and conservation. And the way we figured out how we can do that is how do we basically leverage the forces of the private sector, working with the public sector to get more money going towards conservation that really matters. Basically, not listening to what all of our laws have said since 1970, but if you ask the question, if Mother Nature controlled the purse strings, what would she invest in? And if you look at what we're investing in now, we need to change something. And that's the big part of what I want to talk about, and looking at how market-based approaches can help some of that. There's a lot of people that have tried to kind of talk about marketplaces and the concept of market-based approaches, and these have been around for a long time, all the way back to the 1970s. A big reason why we don't have lead in our gasoline is a market-based approach, where the Environmental Protection Agency said, we need to get rid of lead in gasoline. And they said, we have 5 years to go and do that. You can either reduce the lead in gasoline now, or you can buy permits from other people to reduce that lead in gasoline. Same thing with acid rain. Smokestacks in the Ohio River Valley, putting up sulfur dioxide, turning into acid rain and killing all those lovely maple trees that make my maple syrup in Vermont. Basically saying, You could force every one of those smokestacks to put a scrubber on that took all the sulfur dioxide out. That would have been enormously expensive. Instead, what they said is let's use the market-based approach that allows some facilities to treat more of their sulfur dioxide than they have to and sell those permits to other people who can't quite get there. And what that did is it saved billions of dollars a year. It got sulfur dioxide out of the air much, much faster. And basically, that's something of what we're talking about in the water world. That in 1970, Joe mentioned the Cuyahoga River catching on fire. That's how we got a lot of our laws. The Cuyahoga River caught fire, we got the Clean Water Act. DDT was breaking bald eagle eggs, we got the Endangered Species Act. There was a lot of really nasty visible problems where you could point to somebody and say, it's your problem, go and fix it. The challenge we have now is that a lot of those problems, it's not so easy to point the finger to one person and say, go and fix it. Issues of climate change, issues of urban growth, all of us contribute to the problem. And so if we're gonna try, we can't keep hammering on single people and say, it's your problem, go and fix it. And that's where market-based approaches can be helpful. The Willamette Partnership takes a much different view of market-based approaches than I think a lot of folks have done since the 1970s. When economists first came up with market-based approaches, they were basically talking about how we can get to the cheapest form of regulatory compliance possible. So the Clean Water Act says reduce your nutrients by 50%. Let's use markets to get to that as cheap as possible. What the Willamette Partnership is saying is that our existing regulations, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, made enormous amounts of progress in the 1970s dealing with pipes and nasty visible sources of pollution. It's not dealing as well with more complex problems. And so we've got to start first with what does the watershed need and look towards how we channelize investment to that as much as we can. And we're also very careful to say that market-based approaches are not a silver bullet. They're not good in all situations. But what they're doing is they're changing the conversation to where in the same room you can have an environmental organization, a wastewater facility, a tribal government, and other different farmers saying, how do we actually invest in the watershed the way Mother Nature would have us do that? And my board members are an example of that. I have all of those folks on my board. Now, there's a resurgence in kind of interest in these market-based approaches. And part of that is coming from a couple of different places. One, Joe had mentioned, we have a lot of the science that lets us say, if a farmer, a forester, or a rancher does good things by the environment, this is the amount of environmental benefit that they get. So you have a quantity that you can talk about. The other piece of it is particularly on the people that are needing the benefits that nature provides, there's a lot of pressure on those people. And I want to focus in on one sector particularly, which is water and wastewater utilities. So utilities, water and wastewater utilities, they provide our drinking water, they clean our wastewater, essential. I don't know how many folks have actually paid attention to their water or wastewater bill lately. You should. There's a lot of good information in there, but you'll also notice that they're going up. And in some cases, they're going up pretty fast. A lot of our infrastructure, water and wastewater, we got in the early 1970s and 1980s through major federal grants. In the 1980s, those grants went away, and there was really no plan for replacement of that infrastructure. And the utilities, for their part, did an enormous job convincing people that water was cheap. So much so that we probably right now pay about 1% of our median household income to water and wastewater. That's not that much when you compare it to your cable bill or your cell phone bill. But the kicker is those rates are increasing faster and faster. City of Portland, you're highly aware of this with wastewater and water bills. Nationally, you see about 14% increases per year. And so there's a pressure to change the trajectory of what's going on with utility rates. You're seeing more of the public saying, we can't afford to pay this. And talking with some of the economic development folks out in Washington County, when they're talking about recruiting new business and new industry, basically the questions about, okay, what's the workforce that you have? What's the road infrastructure that you have? What's the tax structure that you have? Those are all considerations. But when you ask, do you have a reliable water supply? That's a yes-no answer. If the answer to that is no, see you later. We'll come back later. So this utility question, the issue of water and wastewater rates, is really critically important. And market-based approaches can help try and level off that trajectory of utility increases. And there's one utility in the Portland metropolitan area that's really done an enormous job of that, and I want to use that as a case example, and that's Clean Water Services. We're fortunate enough here today to have Bill Gaffey and then Mark Jockers with Clean Water Services. This is the wastewater utility for Washington County, serving about 500,000 people. If you live in Beaverton, you live in Hillsborough, you're Intel, you're Solar World, you know Clean Water Services. They treat your wastewater, they deal with your stormwater. And basically in 2004, they had a choice to make. Basically, we all take hot showers. That hot water goes to the wastewater facility. Wastewater facility cleans it, but when it goes out at the end of that pipe, it's still too warm. Salmon don't like hot water. So the choice was, Department of Environmental Quality said, Clean Water Services, you need to cool that water down. And the choices were, we could have passed a rule that said, you all take cold showers. Now, my wife, for one, said that that wasn't a good option, and she's here, and I'll pick on her a little bit, but that wasn't a viable option. The other choice was to basically spend $150 million to build mechanical chillers at the end of the pipe. So basically, hot water coming in through the treatment plant, cooled by a mechanical chiller, 100% sure to comply with the Clean Water Act. Almost equally sure to do nothing for fish. Fish don't need cool water everywhere in the stream. What fish really want is forested streams up in tributaries. They want enough water in those streams at the right time of year. And so the Clean Water Act had stopped listening to what Mother Nature had wanted. And so what Clean Water Services did was take some really key leadership working with the Department of Environmental Quality, farmers, and environmental groups in the Tualatin River. So let's find a different way. And so instead of that $150 million, they invested $6 million over 5 years, restoring 35 miles of streams and getting 30 cubic feet per second of water back in that Tualatin River in the summertime. There's one spot that you can go to on Fano Creek, right in the Tigard area now, that 5 years ago was an urban park, turf grass, going right to the edge of a stream, straight-walled stream banks right down to the bottom. That water got hot, got dirty. Now you go back now, you see 10-foot tall trees, you can see cutthroat trout and river otter back in that same stretch of urban park. Hands down, an environmental better story. Economically, it wins. $150 million and $6 million, that's a big savings for ratepayers. And if you look at Clean Water Services rates over the last 10 years, they've only increased 3.85%. That's one of the lowest rate increases anywhere in the region. So basically, how do we replicate this? How do we make this bigger? How do we make it better? And Clean Water Services deserves an enormous amount of credit for pushing the ball forward on that. And the other piece that Clean Water Services deserves credit for is really working closely with the agriculture community to get this done. In the farm areas throughout Washington County, farmers hadn't been participating in existing programs to restore riparian areas. And so Clean Water Services realized that if they were going to get that to that 35 miles of stream, they needed to work with farmers, just like Joe mentioned, to not just grow bushels of corn, but to grow bushels of nature. And so they pay farmers to provide access to lands to provide those bushels of nature. So now you've got blueberries growing alongside great riparian forests, corn growing alongside healthy streams. It's making a big visible difference, and Mother Nature is just happier. And so the question that we're asking now is, okay, how do you take this to a place that's not like Clean Water Services? Clean Water Services is pretty fortunate. It's a rapidly growing county. It's got some of the best regulatory staff, watershed management staff, restoration professionals in the country. If you look at most public work agencies around Oregon, maybe they have 4 guys, 15 guys. You know, one guy's fix the pipes, the other one buys the chemicals. You know, one might mow the lawn, the other works on the paperwork, and the other one's the boss. They don't know how to plant trees. They don't really want to know how to plant trees, but they want to have this as an option. And that's really where folks like Willamette Partnership and Freshwater Trust and Department of Environmental Quality working together can really start to make a difference. Because what we found in conversations in the Chesapeake Bay and conversations in the Great Lakes and the Southeast is for these market-based approaches to work, you need three things. One of them is clear signals from political leaders that this stuff is important. Two is you need the science and the tools in place to have buyers who want to invest in conservation to match up with the farmers, landowners, and other folks who can provide that conservation. And then the third piece that you need is you need someone that can work with landowners to provide that conservation at no risk to the investors. And we have all of those three things in place here in Oregon now, at least on the water quality side for temperature. For the political piece, Department of Environmental Quality, Dick Peterson, who's the director there, has said, if we build another chiller at the expense of ecosystems in Oregon, we've failed. That kind of clear signal, and that signal that he's willing to take to city councils, has made a huge difference. In the state legislature right now, House Bill 3109 is an ecosystem markets bill that's working its way through the legislature. That provides additional authorities to make more conversations like this happen across the state. That's a clear signal that's important. The Willamette Partnership has worked on kind of the geeky nuts and bolts that says, if you plant this tree, it equals this reduction of temperature in the stream. Or you restore 10 acres of wetland, it results in this increase in nutrient reduction, carbon sequestration, or habitat. And then Freshwater Trust has been able to say to a wastewater facility, you don't need to go and hire 8 people for a restoration staff. We'll go and secure the private financing. We'll put all the deals together and work with landowners, and we'll get those trees in the ground so you don't have to give us $10 million on a promise and a hope that we'll give you something. You just pay us when we deliver restored streams that have met Willamette Partnership and other and DEQ standards, then we have a deal. And that type of risk reduction for wastewater utilities who are very risk averse, and if those trees fail, they're on the hook, right? They get fined. They go to, at the very, very extreme, they would go to jail. And so the nice part about a chiller is you hire your engineers and you flip the switch and it works. The trees, there's a lot of other moving parts. And so to have someone like Freshwater Trust able to link all that stuff together is pretty important. And the other piece is there's emerging examples like this all over Oregon. So just like Clean Water Services, Freshwater Trust and Willamette Partnership are working with at least 4 or 5 different municipal folks across Oregon. There's interest in Washington and Idaho where similar situations, folks are needing to do something to deal with temperature. And the reason that folks care about temperature or nutrients in the water is because we care about having healthy streams that provide clean drinking water, natural places to play, and healthy spots for fish to thrive. And so we're trying to bring all that stuff together. And Joe mentioned the economic benefits of all this, and I wanted to hit that again, that $1 million is 20 jobs, and 80 cents of every dollar stays in that county. And for every dollar that's spent, there's greater than a $2 multiplier. So this wins on the environmental piece, it wins on the economic piece, and politically you're reconnecting communities back to their natural resource base that in this state, we've done a lot to try and separate those things for a long time. And so bringing that together really makes a difference. And over the next 3 years, we want more of these examples. And there's things that are brewing that are really interesting. For example, the city of Damascus, one of Oregon's newest cities, is really trying to figure out how they can take the benefits provided by nature and bring that into their city planning process. How can they use that to lower stormwater runoff? How can they use that to plan for their parks and trails? How can they use it to protect the bluffs above? City of Lincoln City on the coast is looking at a way to protect its watersheds and its source water so that when loads of sediment come down, they don't have to provide bottled water or shut off their drinking water supply. And we need more examples of these as we can. So for really people in this room and listening at home, I think the biggest ask that we have is we want to have more of these conversations in as many places as possible. We want these conversations to be happening in every business sector, every industrial sector, every agricultural sector, every place in Oregon and the Northwest. they can really help change how we invest in nature, and we need to think critically about all the decisions that our utilities are making. We need to pay attention to what our water utilities and our wastewater utilities, our energy utilities are doing. And we really are working to try and change the equation of the conversation from it's your problem, go and fix it, to you have these benefits, I have these needs, how can we come together? And Joe mentioned that the $1 billion problem. Well, Department of Environmental Quality mentioned that it would take about $600 million to $1.2 billion to restore the Willamette River. We spend a lot more on infrastructure every day than that amount. We mentioned the basketball arena. We mentioned other infrastructure investments. We're spending several $billion on high-tech manufacturing facilities. Oregon Department of Transportation, probably in a 3-year time span, might spend close to $100 million on mitigation for the impacts that they have. If we can pool that and take that together, how would you invest that? If you had $600 million and you can invest in verified conservation outcomes. So I'm not going to tell you I have 30 miles of stream. I can tell you I've increased the health of salmon populations by 30%. That's where we can go. So there's a lot more conversation to have. I think we should wrap it up and probably move on to questions. But again, thank you all very, very much.
Before I introduce our Friday Forum host, if you have written a question on an index card, now is your time to hold it up so the City Club staff can come around and collect it from you. The first question for our speaker, as is our tradition, will be from our Friday Forum host, City Club Governor Naomi Cole. Naomi is a program manager for the Portland Sustainability Institute, where she leads the Eco Districts Initiative. Naomi has been a City Club member since 2007 and recently completed a 2-year term as the chair of the New Leaders Council. Naomi.
Thanks. So I was just chatting with Bobby and Joe about this program called the Eco Districts Initiative that I run through the Portland Sustainability Institute. And Eco Districts is really a strategy that links buildings and infrastructure, including natural infrastructure, with community and individual action. And I think there's general consensus that we know what needs to be done on a building side and on an infrastructure side. We're working on developing those tools. But one of the big challenges is really on sort of the community and individual action. So my question is, what's the 1 or 2 most significant things that an individual could do to improve the health of our watersheds, whether it's investing in ecosystem services, planting trees in their backyards, talking to policymakers? What's that sort of individual impact opportunity?
This is always a question that we get, and honestly, as an individual matter, when you take into consideration the size, just the real enormity of the problem, it's really difficult to say, go plant a tree, get a low-flow toilet, turn the water off, while you're brushing your teeth and those things. They're all good. But this is a big, big issue. This requires not individual patching and tinkering. And when I say individual, I'm thinking of Salem. We need to begin to put really big pieces together, and that does come down to citizens saying, we want to make smarter choices in how we invest in the way that our communities work. We need to not be so procedurally focused as we have been over the course of history. We need to focus on outcomes, and we need to track progress. So I think it does come down to getting engaged, as Bobby mentioned, having the conversations where you're at, and getting the ball rolling on this line there.
And for me, I had a great conversation with a city in the middle of the Willamette Valley. And the one thing that I would say is pay attention to your utility bill and provide support to your water and wastewater utilities and city councils as they're trying to do things differently. They need support to do things differently. It's not easy.
Thank you. We will now take questions from the floor. As always, members are invited to the microphone to ask their question. Asking questions at the Friday Forum microphone is a privilege of membership. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a City Club member and ask your questions in 30 seconds or less. And if I flash this beloved City Club question mark, it means to please wrap up your question. Also, I will read at least one audience member index card from here. Thank you.
Hello, Roberta Palmer, City Club member. Great presentation, thank you. Some people who have studied wastewater treatment believe that we should separate yellow from brown waste, originating in homes and buildings. And I can't see doing this unless it's done in new development or new construction. Do you see any possibility or any action along those lines? Also, the related question of, does all water have to be potable at the tap?
So I'm out over my skis a bit in terms of talking about the technology of wastewater. You know, I'm a policy guy, and so in terms of separating yellow water from brown water, I think actually the work on eco districts and some of the decentralized wastewater systems is the most interesting to watch. And I think there are opportunities to do retrofits on older communities. It's going to be a lot harder. In terms of, does all water need to be potable water? I think the original goal of the Clean Water Act was that all fishable, swimmable water is everywhere. I think that we need to still shoot for that, but I think we need to be basically prioritizing where we do that, so that you're saying these are the most important places to work first, but keep the bigger goal in mind too.
Harold Waite, City Club member. A lot of your discussion has revolved around utilities and municipalities. Joe, you mentioned that the farmer doesn't get up in the morning with the intent of harming the stream. And I would sort of underscore that by relating a comment that someone who had moved from Portland to Wallowa County told me a few years back after they'd been there 2 years. These people love the land, meaning the farmers and ranchers. Yet at the same time, that group of people tends to have sort of a knee-jerk reaction against anything they perceive as being imposed on them. My question is, what types of things are you doing or do you see being done that would encourage the individual farmer or rancher to buy in and to help improve their streamside properties?
Harold, that's a great question. It's the question that drives most of our work. The people that influence and control the near stream and in-stream environment, it's agriculture. And I think the fact of the matter is, because everybody does have to eat, agriculture has long enjoyed enormous political clout, right? Really tough to regulate them. And so, I think we get a little bit of the pushback, well, they should just be doing what the law says that they should be doing, right? Well, but when they can't, because they're running the finances of their operation and they're trying to get by, they are faced with, how do I get my seed crops for next year? How do I pay for my implements, et cetera, et cetera? And the fact is, this is going to come down to math. We have to make it worth landowners' while to do the right thing. And I believe, like you, that all things being equal, landowners will do the right thing for their land. It's in their interest. They've done it every chance they could. And I believe that with these new mechanics, we can do that. Now, that position is somewhat contrary to many of my environmental colleagues, because they say, no, you must perform. These guys must perform. And I would say, I would hold up the Gulf dead zone and say, that's 40 years of environmental regulation not performing, with no objective evidence that it's going to change. So do you want the results or not? And I believe that if we put ag in a position to win, we're going to fix this problem in a way that they put money in their pocket and do the right thing. So it's going to come down to math.
A question from the tables. Do you have an outreach program to educate individual homeowners about what actions they can take, and also a program to educate children in elementary schools?
I mean, for the Willamette Partnership, we haven't focused as much on individuals and hasn't focused as much on kind of education and outreach, and maybe we should. We do have a great program called Honoring Our Rivers, which is a collection of student poetry, artwork, all the way from preschool up through college age. So that's our one piece. But our focus has been primarily kind of policymakers, individual landowners, and the people that can do the conservation itself. But maybe we should be doing more.
Oregon did pass No Oregon Child Left Inside last session, which makes environmental literacy a requirement of graduation in high school, and it's not just book learning. Part of that has to do with getting those kids out, designing, building, and monitoring these types of restoration projects. It is one of the first 3 in the country, and I would argue the most robust, and that program is going to be, I think, centralized out of Oregon State University going forward. I don't have complete information on how the City of Portland conducts its business. We have done most of our work out state. I believe that this conversation will have direct implications on how well the City of Portland can actually steward its resources and, in fact, steward the resources of the broader Willamette system. Once a currency that is agreed upon is set forth, whether it's for water quality or salmon benefit, we will begin to make different choices about how that money is invested, and we will pursue not investments that are focused on what it used to look like and how we used to understand things, but how we can invest upstream to get greater ecological benefit for the run of the system. And I think those will come, but I think by the reticence of both my willingness and Bobby's willingness to jump at this one, City of Portland's not ready to do that. The regulatory framework is not ready to do that, and the leaders that should be having that discussion they're just not within striking distance of having that discussion today.
And I think the piece for the City of Portland is Portland has been out there on the edge. They've been trying lots of new things, and they need credit for that. They also need a little bit of wiggle room for that. There's going to be things that work and things that don't work. And a lot of the increases in wastewater and water bills, in some ways, is outside City of Portland's control. And they've tried their darndest to bring it inside their control, but in some ways it's the Environmental Protection Agency, it's the State Department of Health that are determining that. So we're in active conversations with really good folks at the City of Portland, trying to figure out how we can change the pattern of investment so we can try and get a handle on some of those utility rates and making investments in where nature needs it the most.
Apologies to City Club members who still have questions, but we've run out of time for today. There will be no forum next week in honor of Independence Day weekend, but please do join us on Friday, July 8th, when former Governor Barbara Roberts will examine the last 100 years of women's political activity in Oregon. Also, this Monday night at Tugboat Brewing Company, City Club's new Leaders Council is hosting a Portland Trivia Night. We invite you to join us for this fun, and to learn more, please see the City Club website. As we close, please join me in expressing our deep appreciation to today's guests, Bobby Cochran and Joe Whitworth. We are adjourned.